Good morning, everyone. If everyone could take a minute and find your seat. My name's Julie Owen, and I have the honor of serving on Dunwoody's Board of Trustees, and I'm just thrilled to see the room full today. It's my pleasure today to welcome all of you for our lead lecture series with our distinguished guest and leader, Susan Denk. She's the owner of White Crane Construction, and if you hadn't done some of your research, White Crane Construction specializes in residential remodeling and has won numerous awards over the years, including a National Contractor of the Year award. Susan comes here with over 40 years of diversified construction and industry experience, both from White Crane Construction and as a leader of one of the country's largest general contracting and services companies. She holds an MBA from University of Texas at Austin and a BA from Miami University in Ohio. Susan has a really strong commitment to the community, and she's very generous in sharing her talents. She currently sits on the board of the Women's Presidents Organization. She's the past chair of the Women's Foundation of Minnesota board. She served as a co-chair on the YWCA Minneapolis Power to Soar $20 million capital campaign. And Susan is a past chair of the YWCA of Minneapolis Board of Directors. I had the pleasure of first meeting Susan Denk when I joined the YWCA of Minneapolis Board of Directors. Brand new on the board, and Susan was the board chair, and immediately from the first meeting I was inspired by her leadership and her energy, and I think you'll get a taste of that when Susan gets up here. So with all of that, it's my pleasure. Let's give a warm welcome to Susan Denk.
Thank you. Thanks, Julie. Okay. Good morning, everybody. You can hear me? All right. Well, thank goodness for technology. So let's see if I can get us going here. There we go. So this morning, I want to chat with you a little bit about my personal story through my career. I entitled this, The Ride of a Lifetime, How to Fall in Love with the Construction Industry. How do you survive the construction industry for the long haul? What drives you? What helps you get up every day and go to work? And in fact, work every day. What happens when you hit a blip? What happens when you hit the next blip? How do you pay it forward? How do you find a way to Hey, Monica, how do you find a way to fall in love with what you do? These are topics I'd like to touch on this morning. Some of my early year jobs, a paper girl. For those of you who have no idea what that job is, I delivered the evening paper in my neighborhood on my bicycle. Loved it. Babysitter. Hated it. Summer job, 3 years at doing food service at SeaWorld of Ohio. Loved it. Summer job, working the factory line at Stouffer's Foods. You know, the frozen pizza, the macaroni and cheese in the frozen aisle. Hated it. Summer job, working construction. Loved it. Now, let's hit the way back machine and talk a little bit about how I got here. All began in 1980, nearly 45 years ago, almost a half a century now. Likely before the majority of you were even born. And yet, let's see if you can relate. I'm banking on it, that you can. Some of the challenges I faced. I was 22, a recent college grad with a BA in public administration. I needed a job. I needed a job. I was scared. I had a degree and a drinking problem. I was in the closet about my sexual orientation, and I was not raised in a family that even talked about sexuality, let alone sexual orientation. I was living with my parents and had just moved to San Antonio, Texas, after graduating from Miami University in Ohio and living in Ohio for many years. I was lonely. Oh, on top of that, I was a woman. These were the disadvantages for me in 1980. The advantages I had, I'm smart. I have a high EQ, which means I can read people reasonably well. I'm a good communicator. I have a strong work ethic. I don't mind work. I like a challenge, provided I can overcome it. I'm tenacious. I'm very tenacious. Or as my wife would say, I'm frustratingly tenacious. I know and knew enough about money to live within my means, and I knew from the start it was important for me to save for retirement. I had an in a construction company that I'd worked for over the summer and Christmas break. I am white. Those were some of the advantages for me in 1980. Who here is under the age of 25? Let's see them. Who here under the age of 35? 45? Okay. Any older than that, and you should have you should have some idea of what I'm talking about already figured out. What I am told is that every person in school today has a completely different landscape to navigate than I did. We don't live in the same world I lived in when I was your age. However, I am confident that many of the same questions I ask daily, weekly, yearly, are the same ones you ask. What lights me up? Learning lights me up. Moving forward lights me up. Stay interested and learn something. Construction is fascinating. Once you master something, move on, or better yet, teach it, then move on. The nature of construction is to finish things. You build something, and then you get to move on. For me, there was an entire career in that. A few career points and some street cred. I have 43 years in the construction industry full-time. I have worked for 2 companies in my career, not a point I'm recommending in this speech, not particularly a negative either, but more about that a little later. I have had many, many jobs under 2 umbrella companies. 22 years of my career was working for H.B. Zachary Company, a privately held heavy and industrial construction company based in San Antonio, Texas. In 2002, when I left, the company was approximately doing $2 billion a year in revenue. That's a B, billion. They built commercial buildings, power plants, highways, process plants, and did some international work. My early career was spent finding my way, having lots of fun, and realizing sometimes too that too much fun, said differently, I was having too much fun. Said differently, I wasn't always making the best choices. My first job with Zachary was working at the Metropolitan Professional Building and Hospital. My job title, office engineer, entry level. Whatever needed doing, but not administrative or accounting work. I was running permits, meeting with doctors about their soon-to-be remodeled spaces, lots and lots of gopher work. Let's see if we can get this going here. Commerce Plaza, job title, office engineer. Random engineering and project management support, lots of field time, including verification of post-tension cable pulls, and working with our concrete supplier on concrete strength testing. It's really important that whatever you're building doesn't fall down. Here's a picture, not of me, of somebody walking rebar and post-tension cables. Yep, I did a lot of this, and I did it all 20 stories up. I'm not afraid of heights. Here's the Hilton Palacio del Rio, major renovation. My job title, still office engineer. But at this time, I was becoming more valuable, coordinating the construction process and renovation inside of an operating hotel. Great fun, great fun. But the project manager on that job was both immature and a misogynist. More about that later. He stayed away from me, and I from him. From there on, I went into the estimating department. Not my favorite job. And then onwards, this is a residence hall at Trinity University. My job title is now project engineer. Office engineer, project engineer. Loved building this building, and there were some real challenges. You know how I love a challenge. Remember, frustratingly tenacious. In 1986, however, I decided I needed more growth, so back to school I went, while still working at the commercial division for Zachary. In 1988, I graduated with an MBA via an executive program at the University of Texas in Austin. Once graduated, the commercial division vice president called me into his office and said, "Susan, you have many choices in this company. There are many divisions where you can work and thrive. However, we're only going to pay you to do one. That is to join the power division." So, as you might guess, Susan joins the power group. And the division, and this is the division of the company that develops and builds power plants. I began, I believe, with the job title of superintendent, which has absolutely nothing to do with the role I played. I guess at the time, it fit the pay grade. To my knowledge, there were no other MBAs in the company at that point but one, the CFO of all Zachary Holdings. Lots of engineers, no MBAs. My next role was in strategic planning. I was in the room where it happened. Let's talk a little bit about exposure. Exposure. It's a good thing when it's a good thing. Finding opportunities in your career to have people see you, and in my case, it was the executive committee at Zachary. It included the owner of the company, the CFO, the CEO, the COO, the division VPs filed in, and at that time, I'm taking notes, assembling data, and writing agendas, but still, I was in the room. From here, my world got a little bit bigger. This is a 250 megawatt gas-fired power plant, and it's in its startup condition in East Texas when I arrived. They told me, "Susan, 5 years of experience in 6 months." The plant was just about finished when I arrived, but it had to be started. It's not like a car. You don't just turn the ignition. I don't recall the name of the plant, to be honest with you, but I do recall the name of my boss, Jim Hunt, the startup manager. At this point, a new theme arises. Make yourself useful. At this point, I didn't know the front end of a power plant from the back end of a power plant. Jim knew that I didn't know, and I knew that he knew that I didn't know. But I still worked so hard, and I learned fast. In different words, I made myself useful. The next the photos I'm going to show you are of a wood-burning power plant in Hurt, Virginia. So that is a truck dumping wood chips, and this is the overall site of the plant. In 1992, I was tasked to build a 45-megawatt biomass power plant as EPC director. That's the director of engineering, procurement, and construction. So let's talk about the importance of mentors in your careers for just a minute. I would say to you, find them, demand them, leave companies and jobs if necessary to seek them. My mentor at this time was Moon Fayhill, the chief engineer at Zachary, a Syrian immigrant to the United States at 16. He came here all by himself. Because of his history, Moon was someone who was different in our company. Not white, not tall, and he had an accent. He could be hard on people, particularly young male engineers who let things slide. He was both brilliant and exacting. He worked hard, and his expectations were high. All things I could relate to. Plus, he was good to me. He taught me things. He taught me to look at what we were buying and to build relationships up and down the project with our customers and with our suppliers. On this project, I found myself in Worcester, Massachusetts, looking at our boiler production, in Finspång, Sweden, looking at our turbine production, in France, looking at electrical gear, all the while building a project in the backwoods, and I mean backwoods, of Virginia. Just prior to being assigned to the Hurt wood burner, this plant, I had a personal fork in the road. It had been clear to me for a very long time I had a drinking problem. Now, I was a reasonably high-functioning alcoholic. In terms of the fellowships of Alcoholics Anonymous, I would be known as a high-bottom drunk. On April the 26th, 1992, I sobered up and began what I really hope, is a lifelong journey in AA. This coming April, I'll have 31 years of sobriety, and thank you. What a gift that is in my story. That is a billet of stainless steel. For anybody that's wondering what you're looking at, it's very hot right at the moment. From there, I found myself negotiating with Hitachi Corporation of Tokyo to install their equipment in a stainless steel rolling mill in Gent, Kentucky. Roughly a $40 million contract with liquidated damages for both performance and schedule, and corresponding bonuses for the same. Now, I share this because this was a deep learning time for me. As EPC director working for Hitachi Corporation and native Japanese men, Let's talk about culture and the role of women in Japan in the late 80s and early 90s. There was no role for women in operational management, and I mean no role. A new mentor steps in. Peter Van Noort, the then president of Zachary, and for me, the man that said it was okay to say no to the Hitachi Corporation. We had a bad deal going into this contract, and with this permission in hand and the audacity of a woman to say no to a Japanese man, we got a much better deal and a much better project. As a side note, in life, sometimes we get stuck. We get stuck individually, we get stuck as a company, we get stuck as a culture. We had let bad behaviors linger. Peter was a breath of fresh air for Zachary. He said no to misogyny, and he said it out loud. Misogyny, for those of you who may not know, is the dislike or contempt for or ingrained prejudice against women. Instead of letting comments or cracks or jokes about women go by, he stopped them in their tracks, and the man or men who thought it was acceptable behavior. Bad behaviors that were once tolerated or overlooked or shrugged off or laughed off were stopped. And the locker room talk, the field talk, the urinal talk, he made it clear it was way, way past time to clean up our acts and to clean up our acts up and down the company and to act like professionals at every level, from the laborer to the electrician to the manager to the executive. A breath of fresh air indeed. In the years 1996 to 2002, they were a period of transition for me. First, Zachary Corporation moved from a second-generation leadership, remember it's privately held, it's family held, second-generation leadership to third-generation leadership, from Bartel Zachary to John Zachary. Personally, a chance meeting for me turns into something much more. I meet a Minnesotan who was visiting mutual friends in San Antonio. She is now my wife, Deb. We have been together 26 years. So guess what happens? I transplanted myself from balmy Texas to Minnesota in December. Yeah, particularly this year. My first years in Minnesota, I was still employed by Zachary. In my view, at that time, I'd been overlooked for a promotion to vice president. Well, two other colleagues, tall, white men, were promoted to the VP spots. At that time, John Zachary had taken the helm from his father. I came out as a lesbian to John, and he supported me and allowed me to work from my home in Minneapolis. At the time, I was managing our engineering partnerships throughout the country, but primarily Chicago, Kansas City, and Pasadena. I was flying for a living. Now, for just a moment, let's discuss, again, the value of exposure. In a good way. Service work can make a real difference. My first years here in Minnesota, I attended a class at the Humphrey School called Leadership for the Common Good, a really valuable experience. I joined the Association of Women Contractors, and I was asked to support a group called Women in the Trades, true tradeswomen who were organizing to support one another in the construction industry. From this interaction, I met Chris Gunderson, a professional carpenter. There's Chris. Switching gears, Chris and I formed a relationship and took the plunge. We formed White Crane Construction. I found a new employer, me. Switching gears, going from very big stuff to little stuff, a residential remodeler was born. From $200 million size projects to a much smaller world. Projects that ran from $20,000 to $500,000, nearly all residential remodels. So in 2002, White Crane Construction is founded and an entrepreneur is born. Chris gave me the courage. A journeywoman carpenter helped me believe we could make a run of it. We each invested $5,000 and formed White Crane Construction LLC. We started by building our reputation, one remodel at a time. In 2002, we did about $300,000 in income total that year. In 2005, I bought Chris's shares of White Crane and became the sole owner. In 2022, White Crane did roughly $6.6 million in revenue. Quite a bit of growth. As a design-build firm, White Crane Construction delivers high-quality residential design and remodeling. With an emphasis on communication and understanding client expectations, we strive to make the often complex building process user-friendly. Customer service, responsiveness, and integrity are all essential to our client relationships and projects. I'm frequently asked, and I was this morning, I think, why residential remodeling? I needed a job in Minnesota, and I believe this could provide me a real opportunity. I knew that it didn't matter if we were building a power plant, a commercial building, or a kitchen. The pieces are essentially the same. They all have engineering and design. You procure things and you build things. I will say, at the time, thank goodness Deb had a great job. I could focus then on growing the company. So, I think Julie mentioned award-winning. We became award-winning. For sure, this picture is a long time ago. Love the lapels. We were experts. We were truly experts in construction, but that is not why we were successful. I'll share a couple of White Crane's marketing pieces, one titled Communication and one titled Craftsmanship. Here's what we wrote back then and still believe it about communication. Communication isn't what we say. It's what you understand. We live in an age of cell phones and email and instant messages and search engines, a time when everyone expects instant communication and information. It's crazy. Yet with more technology, it seems that we actually communicate less. I'm sure you've heard this from your faculty. Knowing the challenges, we make sure at White Crane that you understand the scope of your project, the process that we're going to perform. We take care to avoid surprises and minimize misunderstandings. Everyone is a part of the communication team, listening, responding, and clarifying all the way. Our door is open, our cell phones are charged, and we stand ready to communicate. Early White Crane philosophy. Here's what we said about craftsmanship. Craftsmanship isn't something you claim for yourself. Craftsmanship is what others bestow upon you. They say, nobody builds houses the way they used to. They say craftsmanship is a lost art. We don't believe it. We can't believe it. We see beautiful craftsmanship all the time. Today's custom-built cabinetry are as fine as they've ever been, and factory cabinetry for that matter. You can import amazing tile and glass from anywhere in the world. And the quality, selection of finishing details, hardware, and fixtures is unlimited. But even with this wealth of materials and technology available today, you still need the care and skill of talented craftspeople to put it all together so it functions well, is beautiful, and it lasts for generations. Sure, every contractor claims they have the best craftspeople, but don't take anyone's word for it. See it, touch it, then you'll know it's true. We remodel houses the way they used to. Here are a couple of examples. Prior to 2010, White Crane farmed out design, both architectural and structural engineering work and the interior design. We needed much more capability, and with our growth, bought a new model in our business, which included full-time professional designers. In 2023, and there's one of them here, in 2023, we have 4 professional designers, and we will hire an entry-level interior designer in May of this year. In 2016, White Crane Marketing switched gears. In the early days, to generate business, we relied on reputation, and we also advertised in print media, also known, for those of you that may not know, newspapers and magazines. We promoted ourselves on Angie's List. We had booths at home shows. We participated in the spring and fall remodeler showcase. And of course, we relied on referrals. Your reputation, my reputation, is incredibly important. I say this morning to each of you, manage it, curate it, make it shine much brighter in your Insta, TikTok, or Twitter feeds. In 2016, we started to get serious about digital marketing, including targeting the folks who might actually want our services. That year, we had 5,700 people visit our website, likely less than some of your Insta or Twitter followers. In 2022, we had 58,000 people visit our website, averaging 4,900 per month, mostly folks from the Twin Cities and first-ring suburbs. These are people coming to our website, a 930% increase over 2016. As I close, I want to touch back to the opportunities and exposure in a good way that service work brings. I've had the opportunity through my service at the YWCA Minneapolis, the Women's Foundation of Minnesota, and the Women's President's Organization to meet some incredible leaders. They have taught me so much. In fact, they brought me to you this morning. This is Nicole Slominski Hawes and little Cam Hawes. He just came into this world a week or so ago. Nicole is a 2015 graduate of the Interior Design program at Dunwoody. She's one of our senior designers for White Crane, and she's an outstanding salesperson. And by the way, she's very well compensated for this role. She and Jeffrey are also in mid-construction of their own new home. Just a frame of reference, Nicole would have raised her hand in the 25 to 35 group. She's not been out long. We are just, let's see here, just a few last thoughts I would like to share with you. Look for role models. Look for mentors. Look for opportunities. Look for God winks. Look for ways to make yourself useful. Look to make a difference. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the invitation to spend time with you this morning. It's been a true, true pleasure.
Thank you, Susan. Great presentation. We have a few minutes for a couple questions. If somebody out there would just raise your hand, I'll bring the mic to you. Nancy?
Yes. How did you derive at the name White Crane for your business?
Thank you. Great question, a common question. So, for those of you that pay attention to construction, and I hope like heck there's a few of you here that do, many construction companies are named after their owners, right? Mortensen might come to mind. Okay. So my last name is Denk. Chris's last name is Gunderson. We are two women entering and starting a construction company. We didn't like that name. Denk Gunderson Construction just didn't have a ring to it. So we spent some time thinking about the name of the company and came to White Crane because we loved the strength and grace that was connoted by that bird. So that's how we came to the name White Crane Construction.
Anybody else? Hang on just a second. Be right there. I could probably get her with my voice.
What's the oldest house you've ever worked on?
You see me turn right there, pivot. Bill Braniff, yeah.
We occasionally find ourselves working on homes pre-1900. The vast majority of the homes we work on are either pre-World War II or post-World War II. A lot of 1.5 stories were built in the 40s and 50s.
I'm sorry, maybe you can use the mic. It was hard to hear you back there.
I'll stick to the short answer. Occasionally we work in homes from the 1890s and even 1880s. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you think our expertise are in older homes. So when I talked about the Twin Cities and the first ring of suburbs, we actually don't spend a lot of time in Apple Valley or further out in newer homes. And you guys, because of your age, we think 1980 is a new home, right? 2000 is a new home. And you're like, what are you talking about? But if you look at the houses that you may live in or the housing stock because of the age of the cities, it's significantly older than that.
It sounds like, per your story, you faced a lot of adversity for being a woman in the white male-dominated industry. I'm wondering how you address that within White Crane. What sort of initiatives and what do you push for as it relates to hiring and such?
Right. Well, as you guys heard a little bit about my service work, I don't think there's any board that I just talked about that didn't have women in it, right? The YWCA, that W stands for women. And so over the years, the adversity that I faced, get back to the frustratingly tenacious, I love construction. I love construction. And so I was able to find a way to successfully navigate in, frankly, in an operational role that didn't have a lot of women in it. As a matter of fact, had very few. So back in those early days, and I just talked to, truly, last week, the engineers that are the Women in Construction group for the Heavy and Highway Division at Zachary, out of the sort of a blast from the past here, I'm talking at Dunwoody, and I get a call back from a company that I left in 2002, and with some people that that were still there. So to answer your question, we had 2 women as founders. I will assure you, there's some data that we know about the role of women and things about pay and whether or not you're white or Hispanic or African American or indigenous to Minnesota and what those pay gaps are. We actually know that they still exist. They don't in my company, and we think about that. We talk about it a lot because there's a whole lot of ways. Remember that piece of the speech where I talked about you can get stuck? You can get stuck in bad behaviors. Well, what we try to do is to unstick ourselves, because even a 20-year company can get stuck in bad behaviors, and we review that on a regular basis to ensure that we are not imposing different pay with women and roles for women because, for example, they may not have exactly as much experience in residential remodeling as a gentleman that's also in a project management role. As a matter of fact, we had this discussion a couple of weeks ago with one of our team members. And the conclusion we came to, if you have this body of work in management, and it's equal to your male counterpart, and you're actually performing at those sort of a level, then my goodness, level it up. Make sure it stays leveled up. Does that answer your question?
Got another one over here.
Hi, thanks for speaking.
Sure.
How did you survive the recession of 2008?
Stupidly. No. Yeah, I used something, I wasn't sure that people understood. I said something, look for the God winks. Well, this was a God wink for us. So as a small company at that point in time, many of our competitors were pretty far out on a limb by then. Remember, we just founded in 2002. It was a bit of a slow burn. I was scared, initially for sure. But as we were building the size of the company, we just kept on going and building those relationships. So I didn't hit a big blip in 2008. We just kind of went through it. We continued to grow through it. We didn't grow significantly, but what we hadn't done, which many of our competitors had done, is they had gotten into development, housing development, and they found themselves out on a limb that broke. And so that's how we survived it. It was luck. So luck and reputation, people will call, stuff still needs to be done along the way. And so we were grateful for that.
You mentioned, obviously, you went from a really, really large organization doing large projects to doing, the opposite, the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
First, other than the dollar amounts, what were some of the big things that were different between that sort of scope and scale? And then second, how have you leveraged your own experience, particularly both technical, which was pretty vast, as well as having an MBA, into a space and a sector, in remodeling or even residential home building that doesn't necessarily have that kind of real technical and business acumen and expertise?
I was serious about the pieces, so let's just go back to that for just a starter. The pieces of whether or not you're building a power plant or you're building a kitchen, those pieces really are the same. I mean, there's some amount of design and engineering has to be done. You have to be able to procure stuff. You got to know where to procure it. You have to have a relationship with suppliers. And then you got to be able to put it together. And so those are all truisms. So I will say to you, one of the gentlemen here was talking about whether you should go back to commercial or whether you should go into residential construction. And I would argue I could talk for a long time about that. Heavy industrial construction will move you, just so you know, like physically pick you up and put you down someplace else, because they're not building another power plant on Hennepin, right? It's not happening. So if you want to do big stuff, you're going to have to go away. But to your question, what happened for me was I had this opportunity. There's a business line that goes through my story. There is understanding and having the ability to make money, to understand where you are in time financially, what you're doing on your projects, and then you just take that to a larger scope. So for me, even though, and believe me, when I came to Minnesota, I investigated and frankly talked to John Zachary about, you gotta find me a job, because I'm gonna leave this company, I'm staying in Minnesota, and how many women with an MBA and no engineering degree are gonna be able to go to work for Mortensen? I didn't even know how to do that. I had never interviewed, ever. So don't take that path. That's one of the ways you don't want to do it. So as you can imagine, there was real reason for me to be frightened. I'm like in the kind of mid-low executive level and being paid accordingly, and to go to convince the Mortensens that, hey, why don't you, hire me? So that's where, Chris gave me the courage to start something else. And as it turns out, I love it. I mean, if you look at our website, I love it. And I make a good living doing it, and so do the people that I work with. So that's the other component. You're able to kind of do those things along the way. And so for me, it was a fit, and it also gave me an opportunity to frankly, to do more service work in the community, which I love. So my exposure in Minneapolis, Deb's a serious introvert, is more through the service work that I'm able to do here in the Twin Cities and in the state, and I love it.
I think we have time for one more, and I saw a hand up back here. Here you go, Ruth.
I really feel like I learned something today, so thank you so much. So Chris was instrumental, right?
Absolutely.
You broke off with her. You bought her out.
Yes,
Not
I
broke
did.
off with her,
Yeah.
probably, but
Yep.
what was the impetus?
At that point in time, we were a fairly small company. Chris had a family and had a growing family and was doing her thing in White Crane. For me, I needed to see some additional growth. I was leaning in a pretty hard way. And when we started the organization, again, never did this before. People say, wow, you're an entrepreneur. You must be a great entrepreneur. And it's like, yeah, I was scared to death starting a company. So there just came a fork in the road that for me, we had a discussion whether she would want to buy me out or I would want to buy her out and kind of move on our way. And as it turned out, at the end of that discussion, we had a buy-sell sort of agreement. And that's the way we went. So it worked out. And why Chris is so very important to this story, this is a woman that gave me the courage to be able to do something else. And, from our backgrounds, I came from a deep executive background, long time in a construction industry, whereas Chris came up through the trades and was phenomenal at what she did. And so, but it was in that's the place I got the courage to take the jump. And so I will be eternally grateful to my co-founder along the way.
Great, Susan. Great presentation. Thank you. I think you can hang around if somebody has one or two more quick questions for you afterwards. So thank you. Great presentation. And I'll remind everybody that our next lead speaker series is Thursday, April 6th, where we'll have Chase Hawkins, who's president and CEO of the Carousel Motor Group. So we'll change from construction to automotive next month. So thank you, and a great presentation, Susan. Thank you. Have a great day.